Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Changing Tides podcast. In each episode, we invite guests to have honest conversations about their mental health journeys with the goal of destigmatizing mental health within the Asian American Pacific Islander community. Due to the nature of the podcast, we'll be discussing a variety of mental health topics and possibly triggering experiences. While we and the majority of our guests are not trained professionals, we encourage you to practice self-care while listening and seek professional guidance if you or a loved one is in need of support. With that said, let's start the episode.
Hi, my name is Mike Murase, and I describe my mental health journey as a long process of learning about myself and learning where I fit in, and gradually uh, becoming aware that I'm not so unique, that I share a lot of things with other people. And I think the other part of my journey is to learn about the negative impact of stigma that we all attach to certain mental health issues.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Changing Tides podcast. I am your host, Matthew Yonemura. Welcome to episode 24. We have a very special guest. All of our guests are special. I say this all the time, but this guest is honestly kind of a legend in Little Tokyo, in Southern California, in the AAPI community, and beyond. He's done so much work for all people of color, for all people. And I think he's a really inspiring figure for me and anyone who might consider themselves an activist or someone who just generally fights for social justice. This person is actually one of the creators, founders of Little Tokyo Service Center. And I think it's really insightful to hear from him. And while I loved to talk with him and share a little bit about his mental health story with him, but I encourage everyone to read up more about him because of all of his amazing work. It can't all be fitted on this podcast. It would take too many episodes to tell his whole story. So with that, I'm so excited to share the interview that I did with Mike Murase. Mike, thank you so much for joining the podcast. You're a legend in Little Tokyo, in SoCal, in LTSC, and it's going to be great to share your story with our audience on the podcast. Before I ask you any questions about your story, I want to kind of break down what you just said about the description of your mental health journey. So, do you mind explaining, why you describe your journey as you did?
Well, I know that um, Changing Tide is composed of many young people, but for me, uh, I grew up in a different age. Um, I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and in that era, I think the idea of mental health being talked about on a podcast or in a group or in public was very unusual. And I think that was true both in Japan, where I grew up for the first 9 years, and in this country as well. And so I think it's a process of learning about myself in the context of changing environment in which how mental health is addressed today. So
Yeah, so I appreciate that, and because I kind of did want to start at the beginning.
right,
You were born in Japan, but
right.
as a young boy who moves to America at 9 years old, how did your experiences or your observations as a young boy guide your way toward a life of activism?
Okay, well, first of all, when I was growing up in Japan in the post-World War II era in the 1950s, what I learned about America was that it was a white country made up of white people. And that's what I saw in movies and books and other things that I was exposed to. So when my immigrant family settled in South Central LA in the Crenshaw district, which was a working class community of African Americans and a sizable number of JAs who had been who had come back from World War II concentration camps, and for the most part, trying to rebuild their lives. And then for families like myself, the immigrant families, they're in the same kind of situation where we grew up in a working class community. And so I was exposed to the life of immigrants and life of African Americans, and just life of people trying to sort of climb out of some difficult situations. So I think, you know, as time went on, and I think, things clicked, I became more active in trying to address some of those difficulties and issues that exist beyond me. So, yeah.
Your activism, like, you didn't it didn't take you too long to kind of realize those things clicked in place and for you to become more to become an activist. I mean, notably as early as your college years. Can you
Yeah.
explain what Ghidra, am I saying that right, Ghidra?
Right.
What Ghidra is and why you helped to co-found it?
Okay. First of all, I think I know you want me to talk about myself, but I kind of have to kind of talk about the generational cohort of Sansei. Basically, we're all Sansei at the time. I grew up in that era, and I think many of us were impacted, by society in general. And I think as young people, we were wrestling with questions of identity. Who are we? And who are we in this country almost inevitably include a big part of who we are as a race or ethnicity. And so I think, you know, in the beginning, not being able to express those things and talk about it made, like I think made me feel like maybe I was alone in this discovery, like a process of discovery, or what I was wrestling with in terms of how do I fit in. And in talking to my friends and in small groups, I learned that that was not such a unique thing. It was, that people had, from wherever they were coming from, they had thoughts about how they fit in, what do they, what is the meaning of life in that sense, and so discovering that made us feel like, okay, well, maybe it's a way to talk about this, or to express ourselves, give ourselves a voice. And we looked at existing media, existing periodicals. You can go to the LA Times or Ralph Shimpo in our community. And, you know, it didn't feel to us as young people that those, media outlets were available to us to express ourselves. And so Ghidra was an Asian American movement publication that came out of this at the same time as when ethnic studies was starting on campuses, and a lot of activities were beginning to pick up, heighten in the communities. And so we decided that we would start a vehicle in which young people in particular could express themselves, poetry, art, in prose, and also to try to analyze what's going on in the larger world. And so we did chronicle and cover a number of current events of that time. And so what I thought was an individual journey really became a journey for many of us together. Yeah.
What did it like when you found out that this wasn't an experience that just you were experiencing and you did find this community? For me growing up, I had FOR basketball leagues. There's a lot more Asian Americans around me. For me, it was pretty easy to find people with like-minded experiences. But for you to find that community, what did that mean to you? Like, what kind of revelation was that for you?
Well, I think me being an immigrant and growing up among Black people and mostly Nisei Sansei families. So I would say in the beginning, I felt ostracized by Sansei,
Hmm.
who uh, thought that I was too Japanese,
Hmm.
too FOB. And I think, like I didn't understand it at the time, but in the historical context of, these JAs coming back from camp and being told, don't congregate with other Japanese, don't speak Japanese, don't be so Japanese, be more American. And the implicit thing was that, or else camps might happen to you again, kind of, you know, that
Hmm.
you may be targeted or scapegoated for something that you're not responsible for. Uh, and so, but when it happened to me personally as a young person, like where Sansei's kind of rejected, I wanted to be in this Boy Scout troop made up of Sansei, but I was never invited to be a part of that because I spoke broken English or whatever, So I think personal experiences like that, um, made me question, like what is my path? But
Hmm.
over time, as I learned to speak English and I became more like Sansei, and I consider myself a Sansei because number one, my father's a Kibe Nisei, but also that all of the JAs that grew up in that 60s period, you know, uh, are all baby boomers, and we kind of have a certain vibe, certain value, certain way of acting, and all of that. So uh, I think I learned to fit in more, and and then I also wanted to just take it beyond myself and say, okay, let's get together and work with people to help other people as well.
Hmm.
And eventually, I mean, I became a very political being, and I wanted to change a lot of things, not just about things locally, but just you know, as a lot of the things that were going on were national and international. I want
Hmm.
to, have an impact on that. So
That's interesting because me now, I'm like technically fifth generation by like one
wow,
great grandparent. And
right.
for people my age that are JA, it's almost like I wish I was more in touch with my Japanese side. Like I wish I could speak the language. I wish I
Right.
knew more culturally. So it's really interesting how different the experiences it is for me versus
Yeah.
you growing up. Um, so you kind of you touched on it for sure, but I'd like to like really ask your how did your experiences for you specifically as a person of color, um, like how did that experience impact your mental health at an early age?
Well, I think you know, um, first of all, I guess like in looking back, I don't have recollections about thinking of mental health as an issue for me or for anybody else, really.
Mm,
And I mean, uh, the atmosphere was such that when when families had mental health issues in their families, it was not talked about. It was hidden, um, and even things like drug addictions or alcoholism or domestic violence, a lot of things that are kind of behavioral issues were also not talked about.
mm,
And but at the same time, I think we all knew that even the trauma, the collective trauma of JAs going to camp had an impact on how we acted. And I think like now we talk about it in terms of like transgenerational or intergenerational trauma for people like us who have never been to camp, but can also feel the impact of people who experience camp, and whether it's expressed in the model minority syndrome, or this, or in some families, this drive to excel economically, educationally, all these things. A lot of those things, I think, it was a process of learning after the fact as I was living it, I don't feel like, mental health is, I mean, we wouldn't talk about it like the way you and I are talking about it now, And so, and then in terms of my sort of emotional makeup, which is part of mental health, I think I learned to fight back when I felt there's like I developed a sense of justice and injustice, and on a personal level, on a societal level, and I felt like I'll give you an example. Like my parents, as I said, my father was Kibe, but he spoke broken English. My mother spoke very little English, but so we could be on a just a routine, mundane shopping trip, and I remember like four of us in the family would have to go to every shopping trip because we had to carry the bags home walking because we didn't have a car in the beginning. Uh, and so we walked like 6, 7 blocks with each of us carrying two shopping bags. But when in even in settings like that, I remember the grocery clerk or the produce man or somebody would say, if they engage in some kind of conversation between my parents and these employees, their reaction to my parents initially not understanding something is to repeat it only slower or louder. And to me, my 9-year-old, 10-year-old mind, it came across very uh, disrespectful and as if my parents were stupid and not, like not that they didn't speak English well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think those experiences, I think made me develop, I think, you know, a sense of wanting to fight back because my parents didn't fight back. They were
Mm-hmm.
very, they just, uh, another example is like my father, his Japanese name is Hide, Hide. So in English, it's hide or hide. So his employers, his bosses, and other people would call him Heidi, which to
Mm-hmm.
me sounds like a Swedish girl or a Swiss girl. I don't know what,
Yeah.
you know. But uh, and so I would tell my dad, you should correct them, make them say it right, and he would never do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would have to, like as a 10-year-old kid, say, hey, that's you're saying it wrong. The right way to say it is hide,
Mm-hmm.
kind of sort of. So in some ways, like I think as a reaction to a lot of those things, I developed a certain sense of combativeness, and so I think that's one of the ways I feel like maybe not the most productive or the positive way, but one of the ways I dealt with uh, my sense of like uh, both wanting to stand up for my parents, but feeling like uh, just being treated less than was not acceptable,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of feeling. So um, I think those experiences come from, my immigrant background, being a person of color, and I can give you other incidents of personal prejudice or discrimination or like just racism that I encountered. And that's I think those things shape the way I think about things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that because growing up, we're always thought of, or I grew up on the thought that we are passive people. APIs
Mhm.
are very passive, and that's kind of similar to what you were describing in your parents.
Yeah.
And but your personal experiences and what you saw, I it sounds like that's kind of why you helped establish the Asian American Studies at UCLA. Um, so even more broadly, when it comes to being understood, when it comes to being seen, why is AAPI history and visibility necessary for our community and beyond?
Yeah, I think for all of us to have a full and rich life, I think there are the economic factors, experiential factors, but I think what we go through in our head, what we take in, what we reject, I think all those things make a difference in our lives, and they're all connected to each other. Uh, and I feel like you know um, there are ways to change things, and I developed in my young adult days, I developed a sense of like that social struggle for social change, systemic change, and the activities surrounding social services, they go hand in hand to help people individually, one at a time. Very arduous, task that that our LTSC social workers do on a daily basis. So helping with service is important, but also, dealing with individuals, but also dealing with systems and dealing with, a whole societal thing. I thought was very important. So that's how I became involved in a lot of, I was influenced by a lot of things going on in the 60s, but I think for young people today, it might be difficult to imagine a time when there wasn't ethnic studies because a lot of young people, Asian Americans, you know, do as an elective or they major in Asian American studies. But to to think of a time when you sit through junior high school, and college social studies or history classes and learn what's considered U.S. history and never learn about myself. What are my contributions? What are my struggles? What are my, and then to broaden it out to different groups like Japanese Americans, Asian Americans, people of color, all of that. It, I think we have to do things on both fronts, individuals and systems. And so, like I was influenced, as many people were in the 60s, by the civil rights movement in the South. Later on, the Black liberation movements, the Black Panthers and Malcolm X, anti-war movement, and there was particular feeling among Asian Americans that, this is a war in Vietnam, in Asia, where uh, the mainstream peace movement in America used to talk about bring the boys home. There are 55,000 soldiers, U.S. soldiers of all colors, who died. So they're being brought back in body bags, and they show that on TV. But they never talked about the millions of innocent Vietnamese people who died. And so our our sort of contribution to the peace movement was to say to the mainstream, you have to think about what is going on in Vietnam, who's really being impacted, who's invading who, and talk about it in a full way. And I think that's an example of like, just uh, throughout U.S. history, let's let's tell the truth and let's tell it all, the whole story, not just from the European values, not just from the experience of pioneers, manifest destiny, covered wagon, moving west, and all of that. There were Native Americans living there when you know, took that land. There were slaves, enslaved in the South. That's part of the history too. And what happened with the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, or the Japanese Americans being excluded or almost excluded in 1924, the whole history of immigration laws, housing laws, and uh, you know, uh, laws against land ownership. All those things were there that we learned about. So we felt that okay, we learned about these things. Let's tell the whole story, and then if we don't agree with it, let's try to change it. So that's and so that to me is I think same thing. I mean, like in the community when we came, there were social service agencies. What happened was Well, one agency might be giving out bus tokens. Another agency, a couple blocks down, might be dealing with social security issues. Another might be dealing with immigration law. But all these, agencies or people that help the community existed. But LTSC's idea was to bring all of that together. And we actually, the concept was what's called like a one-stop center. So from a client standpoint, they don't have to walk from here to there, and then get stuck somewhere where, like they go to a government agency, they don't speak the language, But so our idea was, and we brought, it wasn't just the Sanseis, but the Niseis who were here, Iseis, all of us came together and said, let's start something that addresses the needs of the people. And how, so LTSC, as the name implies, started as a service agency, social service agency. And then we took on, affordable housing and lots of other things that we do now, as time went on. So,
So I want to get into LTSC, but
okay,
before we do,
okay,
the what is unbelievable to me is, you kind of have to wait until college to really be able to learn about Asian American history or Asian history.
mm,
For me, at least, my education in middle school, elementary school, high school about Asian history was the Chinese emperor dynasties. It was kind of just glossed over. You just kind of had to memorize the names of the dynasties. And then in high school, we learned about the concentration camps.
uh-huh,
And that was a very small part of learning about Japanese history. That was like the only thing we really learned, and it was glossed over in terms of the whole World War II thing.
mhm,
So, while I'm sure even that is a huge step in the right direction in terms of learning about Japan or Asian American or Asian history, um, it's still barely scratching the surface. So it's sad that there's so little that we learn about ourselves
yeah,
in the history books. It's something that you really have to seek out yourself for the most part, um, or take on as an elective, or even your major in college. But with all that said, I just had to go on a little tangent there.
uh-huh,
Uh,
yeah.
can you please tell me about what went into creating LTSC, the folks that were around you, and the ways in which you aimed to meet the needs of the community, which you already kind of touched on, but I'd love to hear more.
Well, I have to back up a little bit on the history of Little Tokyo, but in the post-war years, you know, um, well, in the pre-war years, in the 1930s, there's a little marker on the corner of San Pedro and First Street on the sidewalk that says that 35,000 Japanese Americans lived within 5 miles of this corner, as in the 1930s. But after World War II, not all of the people came back to Little Tokyo for many different reasons. But so it was a much smaller community. And by the 60s and 70s, when I started relating to Little Tokyo as an adult, uh, many families, Little Tokyo families have, JA families have moved out to other neighborhoods that were previously uh, not allowed to be, residents in. And then by that time, most of the Japanese Americans who were remaining were senior citizens. Many of the families have moved out to the suburbs and other neighborhoods for better schools because I think the impact of the civil rights movement, you know, uh, like getting rid of employment discrimination, housing discrimination, things like that, allow for, so it was actually led by African Americans, but it, had a very positive impact on JAs and others in that, we could, you know, uh, take advantage of new opportunities. And so anyway, what was remaining in Little Tokyo, remember, are mostly monolingual seniors, uh, essays. There were many essays at that time, and you know, some of them have lived here for 50 years, but still didn't speak English well. And so when they had to go to the county office or the city or the federal government office, they could not get the services they needed or wanted. And so you know what what I think what we saw was that um, there were people that were kind of being left behind in Little Tokyo. And I think, uh, for example, I remember like we had a small social service office with a different organization prior to LTSC. I remember like this Issei lady coming with a plastic grocery bag full of letters, unopened envelopes, and she would bring it, maybe 2 weeks worth of mail, and she would say, "I don't know what this is." She couldn't tell the difference between advertisement from Ralph's,
Mm.
from maybe an important, uh, notice from the government, or a bill from the gas company. And so we had to sort all those things out. And you know, that's something that I was used to because as a child, as I developed my English skills and a sense of what America is about, I helped my parents be the translator, interpreters, reading materials, or kind of just even just saying something about, okay, this is how schools here work. And, as parents, they want to help me be a good student, but they didn't understand what schools are like. A lot of things like that. So my own personal experience and the experience of seeing others in need, I think, and again, this is not just about me. It's about uh, my all my friends, my people I work with. They all felt the same way. That these things are problems that can be dealt with, and somebody should do something. And that's you know that's kind of idea that we had in mind. That we shouldn't leave behind the Issei's who really contribute to even the existence of us in our community. You
Mm-hmm.
know, uh, and nowadays there are very few pre-war Issei's. Most of the immigrants who don't speak English now are post-war immigrants, but that's another thing that people don't recognize that much is that there are many post-war immigrants who go through the same kind of issues, economic issues, family, counseling issues, child rearing, all of those things. And so there's continues to be a need for the kind of social services that's provided.
We're taking a quick break to introduce Anchor, the sponsor of this podcast. Anchor is free, first and foremost, which is amazing. Who doesn't love free? And you can record everything directly into Anchor. It's so easy to use Anchor. That's how you are listening to this podcast, whether it's Spotify, Apple, the Anchor website. You're listening to it because I uploaded this podcast episode to Anchor. If you want to start your own podcast, I highly recommend Anchor. It's made this whole process so easy. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. You made it sound almost easy for LTSC to get created. You said we saw a need and we kind of just went for it. But I'd love to hear from you, but I feel like it couldn't have been as simple as we see it, we did it. Maybe it was, but I'd love to know, what kind of emotions you and the founders of LTSC experienced in those early days of being established.
Yeah. Here I have to give a lot of credit to Bill Watanabe, who's the founding executive director. He was the first person hired. I was on the board. I was on the board of but I had a different job somewhere else. And So I feel like Bill and then Yasuko Sakamoto, who was the first and uh, director of social services, and Evelyn Yoshimura, who was a community organizer. Those three became the first three people to be hired, and it wasn't easy. I think I remember that the first fundraising dinner were, nowadays we have sake and in between you used to have tofu festival and all that, but traditionally most of the Japanese American organizations had dinners. And so the first dinner, we thought, okay, if we can organize something and we raise $40,000, that was our goal. If we raise 40,000, that should be cover the budget for the whole year, including uh, don't quote me on this, but I think Bill, as the executive director, took a salary of something like $800 a month in the beginning.
Wait, how much?
$800 a month.
Okay, okay. I thought I heard 800,000 for some reason, but
No,
anyway.
$800 a month.
Got it. Okay.
Okay. And so, for people on staff, I mean, I think they sacrificed in terms of like the economic return. But I don't think anybody complains about the long hours because people love doing the work, and people. But so it started out as a very small operation, grassroots, with a few grants, and over time, because we demonstrated the need, because we addressed the need, uh, in our minds effectively, we were able to, over time, win the confidence of, you know, uh, foundations and government agencies that provided grants. And, so we started in 1980, opened our office in 1980. And today, like we are, as you can see on the annual report, we're a $10 million or greater organization. But I think what's good about LTSC, even now, I'll get back to earlier, but even now, that the sort of the through line that continues from the beginning to end is our values and our work ethic, I think. And so I consider LTSC to be a $10 million grassroots organization, so, but that we retain the the ideals and the goals that we had set.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, I mean, definitely, I mean, any venture you try to start from scratch is very difficult, and I think too there are many other efforts that took place, and a lot of nonprofits that started in the 1960s are no longer around, and so it's you know uh, it's a testament to the people that worked at LTSC over the years. So many people that worked at and the community that supported LTSC. That and I mean, even the sort of the whole area of changing tides or mental health as it relates to young people, or all of these are like uh, responses to needs that we felt were there, and wanting to address them. But before that, I mean, there were mental health counselors. We have like licensed clinical social workers who did mental health counseling for many years before changing tides and all that. But this initiative is such a big and important initiative that's happening now. But I think in a way it starting from 1980s when Bill and Yasko, Evelyn, Mike, all the others, we were in our 30s, some in our 20s, and we you know uh, basically said we're going to do this. I mean, and I think you see today, I feel like there's the same spirit. I think that people in their 20s and 30s, I would say some people stay for a while, others people stay for a long time. That's fine, but and people remain connected. People, you know, even when there's people moved on. I don't even know how many people total ever worked at LTSC. Must be in the hundreds, or maybe 1,000. I don't know.
Yeah.
Because right now we have about 150, but over the course of time, there have been so many people, but and they all contributed.
Hmm. Yeah, I think one of the what really speaks to, well, first, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think what you're talking about in terms of addressing needs, why it was created, it definitely still translates today. It all feels very grassroots.
Mhm.
Even if it isn't, of course, we want to reach as many people as possible, but with changing tides, it's always let's help as many people as possible. But if we could improve one person's life, then we've done our job. So that everything you're saying, me as someone who's just been here for just less than a year, I see all of that still, and
Mhm.
I think what speaks to the work LTSC does is sometimes people will work here, they'll leave for a few years, but people come back. I mean, I know you came back to work after some
Yeah.
time. I mean, I think it speaks to what LTSC stands for, that, people will like to come back to work for LTSC or volunteer. People always
Mhm.
volunteer too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, we've spoken a lot about LTSC, about the experiences of the JA community, of the Japanese community, and your activism in that community. But why was it, and still is it, important for you to be an activist for all people?
Well, I think while there are many differences, I think there's so many things that we share, uh, particularly among people of color, and progressive whites too. But people of color in this country, uh, in different ways, have I would say, have experienced a sense of self, like lack of self-worth, uh, uh, a lack of hope for the future, and sometimes feeling that like sort of a downward spiral of defeatism and disconnectedness. And I think of, you know, in another job that I had many years ago, I worked with Native Americans, and the Native American people, I could see it that in some aspects they it, they manifest a feeling of a conquered people, and in a way, I mean, historically they were conquered, you know, uh, and suffered from genocide and all of that, and so you see it manifest today in I think about the Indian boarding schools where they pull kids out of took kids out of from their families and reservations, put them in a boarding school somewhere else, like 2 states, 3 states over, to Christianize them, to Westernize them, and to take away the Indian savagery from their, that kind of thing. So the destruction of family life, destruction of culture was very systematic. And so when you look at how it impacts people today, whether they're on in relations or more people live in the cities, like LA County has the largest concentration of Native Americans outside any reservation,
Hmm.
all different, tribes and nations. But to see the alcoholism, the domestic violence, the other mental health issues, depression, all of those things are attributable to me to things that were done to them. And so a part of my mental health journey too is to support those people who want to change the situation for the better. And then for myself too, to develop a sense of accomplishment, sense of justice, sense of humanity. I think I think helps my mental health.
Hmm.
You know, because you know, well, I think the other example that I give too is when I worked in the Black community, for part of the time I worked with a lot of Black gangs or gang members, not gangs, but gang members who, for the most part, were supposed to be quote unquote inactive,
Hmm.
meaning that they were involved in gang activities, but they're so ex-gang members. But I met many of them who would describe situations where they went and shot somebody, or and then they say it so casually, like, "Oh, I shot this dude in the head," but or like I tied him up in that, all kinds of inhumane things. And I thought, man, how did these guys get like this? You know, but then I thought about like, okay, like one guy I knew, he his mother was a crackhead. His father was in prison, and he pretty much raised himself. And so then I thought to myself, okay, it's not that how did he get so ruthless and so, you know, uh, uh, inhumane, but it's that how did he survive
Hmm.
that life and still be able to live and function and clean himself up? That sort of. So I felt like experiencing those things with other communities and other peoples uh, made me uh, kind of put my life in perspective, and made me also think that these things that that as enduring and as intractable as those issues are, that something can be done about it.
Hmm.
And the way to do it, like I said, social services, even social services, I think one-on-one, I think it's best when the clinician and the client share a culture or share a language or share the same uh, understanding about vocabulary and things like that. But on a societal level, I felt that the way we're going to change things, Japanese Americans aren't going to do it ourselves. Chinese, even Blacks and Latinos, it's like that we come together based on similar experiences, similar values, and say, let's change the inequities,
Hmm.
uh, the big wealth gap that exists in this country, and so I feel like mental health is a both a very personal uh, an individual thing, but also a societal issue and a
Hmm.
political issue. I would say mental health is political.
Hmm. I agree. I mean,
Yeah.
in a number of ways. I mean, when it comes to the way the government funds social services or social work, when it comes to the healthcare system, when it comes to there's so many different layers where mental health has intersections with other fields where I totally agree with everything you're saying. And for you and your story, you know, the drive for to help others being something that helps your mental health, that's, I mean, I wish more people had that quality because I think that would improve the world. But at the same time, in helping other people in LTSC or in other work, that has to be, and it can be stressful at times. So in helping and fighting for other people, I'm wondering who you went to when you needed help. So what role has your support system played throughout your life?
Yeah, I guess since the 1960s, so since my college days, I had a fairly large circle of friends, and they were. This is prior to the flowering of the Asian American movement, the political movement is like in the uh, you know, in the mid 60s, it was about like just social things, going to dances, playing basketball, starting, sports leagues, going to beach parties, but I had a group of people that I gravitated toward and became very close to. And I think that was my support system at that time. Now, again, at a place like UCLA, there's other campuses too, but today, maybe Asian Americans can feel like, okay, well, we're 50% of the campus, you know, we're all over, we're in this and we're in that. Well, when I went to UCLA, I would say it was no more than 10% Asian.
Wow.
Most of the Asians at that time were JAs. But so the the relationship that you have to the rest of the school is different, and but uh that I think made us gravitate towards each other more. We came from different places like high schools like LA High, Dorsey, Roosevelt, Garfield, Gardena High. There was only about 6 high schools that most of us came out of at that time because it was partly in the middle of the dispersal. But anyway, so I think being such a small community within the UCLA campus, and it made us feel like we, you know, and I think we got like very close because in a sense it was I maybe I overstating it to say it was a threat, but there was an external force that made us kind of bring
Mm.
us closer together. Uh, I think the kind of racism that we experienced at UCLA was more like maybe on a personal level of like, you know, people call microaggressions now, or stupid questions, or that sort of thing. But it's still like there's uh, a sense that um, and the JAs were not the children of college graduates or professionals or other things. I mean, a lot of us were coming from working class communities and working class families, gardeners and seamstresses and
Mm.
all of that. So that was different too. But so that was one group of people that I developed very close ties with, and that some of them came to my retirement party,
Mm.
you know, 50 years later. But uh, and then after I got involved in the Asian American movement, I think we didn't always do it the best way, but there were a lot of struggles amongst us ourselves, questioning our own ideas and other people's ideas. And so, but I feel like, this uh sh- the the idea of struggling to understand something new or taking up a common enemy or
Mm.
common project, uh, common difficulty made us stronger.
Mm.
And a lot of times people wonder why the guys in the 442 had all these reunions if war was such hell. Why would they want to rebuild, relive it? Or people in camps, why did they have these pilgrimages to Manzanar and to Heart Mountain, all these places, if camp was so bad? Well, I think part of it is that you strengthen interpersonal bonds by working on something together, a goal together. And in the case of, for two, but to fight a war and depend on each other, you know. But
Mm-hmm.
in other settings too, we all fought wars and we had to depend on each other, So uh, I think uh, that was a good support system. And I would say too that maybe a part of my upbringing is to repress other mental health issues that maybe I should be talking about, and maybe it's a convenient thing to find something else to work on,
Mm.
but uh, because I don't feel that. uh, in many interpersonal situations or even in family situations that I've over the years, I haven't handled everything in the way that I'm proud of.
Mm-hmm.
There have been, you know, whether it's outbursts or, different things that, and, I guess as it's happening, I don't characterize them as mental health issues. I mean, I reflect on it much later,
Mm-hmm.
but so I think that's there too. It's not like I had all this support network, so everything was fine and dandy.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
So, the fact that you're able to reflect and now you're able to realize, you know, you didn't always handle your some of these situations the best way. And, we from the beginning we discussed how mental health wasn't really a thing that people were aware of back when you were growing
Mhm.
up. So, how has your awareness of mental health evolved over time?
I think well, I would say like even in the last 5 years, the fact that uh, more people are coming to recognition that it's something that is not to be ashamed of, not to hide, and but to can be addressed in many ways. And I don't think you have to publicize mental health. I mean, it's like it's a personal thing, but that there are ways to deal with it, whether it's group support systems or counseling or you know other ways. But the fact that I'm learning from the fact that other people are talking about it, and I mean now it's at a point where you could talk about Ron Art, uh, Meta World Peace, or you could talk about Naomi Osaka. You could talk a dozen other NBA players right now. You know, I mean, and I think society itself is, coming to grips with the mental health issue. Um, and I think it's a good thing. But at LTSC, I think Margaret uh, played a very important role in having us think more about trying to address mental health issues as they exist in the community. And it's very much in the spirit of you know um, meeting unmet needs. There used to be LTSC's tagline for many years, like we meet unmet needs. And I think Margaret was instrumental in kind of seeing or having the vision to say this is something that's going to uh, only get worse if we don't deal with it. And so I think that initiative, and then the young people that came around to form Changing Tides. I think just ran with it, and like really, I think the uh, the idea of uh, a group of people being able to address or have an impact on problems that exist. This mental health is one of many problems in the community, but that people can have the will and the capacity to do something as a group. And I think what I mean. So I think I mean it's I'm very proud of all of you doing this. It's such a good development that to see. Uh, so yeah.
I appreciate that. And I mean, I think I need your help to recruit Margaret to get onto the podcast because she's too modest to share her story. So if you could help me encourage her, I think that would go a long way. Um,
Okay.
so I want to get back into a little bit more of the LTSC stuff before we wrap up.
Yeah, okay.
One project that I know you were very passionate about that finally came to fruition is the Terasaki Budokan. Um,
Mhm.
so I asked Ryan when he was on the podcast about it, but what does the Terasaki Budokan mean to Little Tokyo, and what does it mean to you?
Okay. I think. in the process of developing the idea, raising the money, finding the land, we came up with sort of three ideas or three goals for the Terasaki Budokan. And I think many people, it may sound formulaic, and people have heard it before, but one was to help in the revitalization and the sustainability of the community, Little Tokyo, which is a small neighborhood that's rooted in the history, experience, and culture of Japanese Americans. But today is a very multiracial, multicultural environment. But it's a community that many of us love, and we want to have continue for years to come. And that means that having, this supporting legacy businesses, supporting the economy of Little Tokyo. The second was that, I basketball in my youth. I was one of the original Tigers. The Japanese American basketball subculture experience is, like people know about that. And we thought that, okay, when we were growing up, we had community basketball. People were included at whatever skill level they had. And that part of it had to do with the culture, developing friendships, and all of that, not, things beyond sports. And coming to Little Tokyo was, or to any other, community gathering was a part of it. Could have been at the Venice Community Center or at the Gardena JCI, different places, but Little Tokyo represented something that we wanted young people to experience, much as we experienced it in our youth, and it's something that I think as a physical manifestation of the fact that collectively we've been here for many, many years is a part of that identity that we have, whether, I'm a post-war immigrant, but I claim everything that happened to Japanese Americans from the 1880s on, and that's what I feel like people should do. Or even if you don't think in those global and societal terms, to create some personal memories of Little Tokyo as you grow up. And I think that's, to me, has a mental health aspect to it, because what we talked about earlier about not feeling connected to something, not feeling or a sense of identity about something, about who you are, is a risk factor to mental health, I think. So that, and then the third, obviously, we know that in the downtown area, there are very few recreational spaces, and there are people in low-income housing and other housing. Downtown is not a desert. There are people that reside in downtown area, many low-income people. So we wanted to provide that kind of a recreational space for them. So those three things I think we've been able to do. And so for the community, those are the things. But for me personally, I feel like it is, like I said, it's a connecting all the different aspects of my life and in the way that it makes sense to me. And, recently there was a gathering of Sansei dance bands. I don't know if you know about the Sansei dance scene, but it was a big subcultural thing. But there were many Sansei dance bands and dances that took place every week. I was peripheral to that, but I participated in that. I gravitated more to sports and politics, and community, politics in the sense of community building, and all of that. So those two things sort of came together in this project, and I think I was one of the many people who said in the 70s, right, we should have a gym. And I think, Bill and LTSC at the time said, well, it took until about 1994, but said, yeah, let's give it a go. I mean, we all dream, but just dream. We're gonna do something about a dream we have. And so we took it on, and this is very little known, but there must have been at least half a dozen times during the course of the 25 years that we almost aborted the project it was because it was that hard to raise the money and to do. And a lot of times it also had to do with like a lot of naysayers. People said, no, that can't happen. You guys can't do it. All of these things. And so facing those obstacles, like I think as a group, we took it on and said, we're going to do what we can. Let's see where it goes, and that's very much in keeping with the spirit that I have about life. It's like, let's go for it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's. I mean, I played FOR from first grade to 12th grade, and
Yeah.
they're some of my best friends that I have ever had, and I play with four of those guys at the Budokan every Sunday now for the N Hoop League. So I mean, I think for me, just to see this place be made and now to be able to play in it, like for me, it feels very full circle. But I could only imagine for you, who was there from the beginning, to see it now come to fruition and people occupy that space. It must be a beautiful thing. Um,
Yeah, it is.
so, before I have some questions I want to ask just for fun. But
Okay.
before that, I want to ask, maybe I don't know if it's still basketball for you, but how do you check in with yourself when in times of need, or just you're lounging around and you're thinking, how am I doing? How do you check in with yourself?
Yeah. Thankfully, I have people that will check in with me
Mm,
or put me in check, because maybe
mm,
more like it. And and I think it's interesting too, because throughout my life, I don't know where I'm going with this, but I made this observation that I had a very strong grandmother in Japan, who had the experience of living in America, and it was in Japan. She was ahead of her time. She taught school when women didn't do that. Uh, my mother was also a strong figure. Then in my political and community life, I met a lot of strong women, and then when I worked for a member of Congress, that's Maxine Waters, and she was a strong woman, and all of those, I think, I I'm completely analyzing, but I think all those people were willing to check me
hmm.
and say, "Hey, you're doing this. Are you sure you want to do it this way? Are you doing, are you feeling okay about this? All of these things." So, and I feel like sometimes it's involuntary. I mean, I had to take it when I didn't want to, but those things really strengthened me. I feel like the uh, the willingness of others to say, "Hey, Mike, you need to check yourself out because you're doing this and you're impacting somebody this way," you know, uh, and all those kinds of things. So, and I think over time, I think you know, people doing that helped me to check myself too, in terms of like uh, kind of reflecting and thinking about, okay, what could I have done better, or things like that, or it, in terms of like again, like how I feel. Do I feel any sense of like crisis or anything? Like, I mean, times when I've had what like depression, uh, but they were, for me, it was like very connected to life events,
Hmm.
like death in the family or things like that. So I feel like either that my activities and my focus on other things kept me going in a positive way, and or I repressed a lot of things that I should be looking into more, but yeah, so
Hmm.
you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. No, I hear you, and I think that at the very least, you're at least seeing that there is possibly things that you haven't looked into yet. I think that's like a step for a lot of people where
Yeah,
it's hard to realize, maybe I didn't handle this right, or, it's there's just other stuff that's not resolved, and that's kind of where the work begins. So I think
yeah.
that might resonate with a lot of people. So before I ask you some of these quick fire, just to get to know you questions, is there anything else you'd like to say?
Um, no, let's go. Quick
Okay.
fire.
So I just thought of this one. I didn't write this one down, but what NBA? Because I didn't get to see you in your prime basketball days. So what basketball player in the NBA plays most like you?
Mm, I was going to say uh, Jamal Wilkes, but I don't think so. Like okay, I played basketball. Most of my life, I played forward.
Okay,
I'm 5'10", and in my age group, 5'10" was tall. So I played forward. So I would be probably um, I don't know who's just scrappy, but or kind. I feel like I understand basketball, but I'm not a great athlete.
okay,
So I relied on my uh, head, but
like a
and I
Draymond Green almost.
yeah, but maybe yeah, maybe.
But maybe not as outspoken on the court or hot headed, but he kind of sounds like that mold.
Yeah, no, I used to be hot-headed on the
Oh,
court.
okay,
Yeah,
okay. I'm glad I didn't have to play against you then. That might not have gone so
yeah,
well.
and yeah, it was interesting because I took it up kind of late because what I said earlier about not being included
Yeah,
initially,
yeah.
but uh, I think uh, yeah, I think I studied the game a lot more than people who are
Wow.
naturally good,
Hmm.
So and again, like in community basketball, I played high school basketball too, but in community basketball, you know, um, it was all about good, and it was just about doing things the right way and then having a good time.
Uh-huh.
So uh, yeah, but I don't know if Draymond Green is the right person, but I can't
Okay.
think of other people. Yeah,
Okay. Well, if it ever comes to you, let me know, and
yeah,
we'll talk about
okay,
it again.
all right.
Um, if you had to choose, what is currently your favorite restaurant in Little Tokyo?
I like Koraku and Mitsuru Grill. And
Hmm.
not say why. I used to like Ebisu, but it closed during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Koraku is a greasy spoon. It's they don't advertise it like I think they should. I was going to talk to Megan and Mariko about this, but they're the first uh, ramen shop in North America.
Oh, wow.
Now, that should be on the, on the building, the
Yeah.
first round. But anyway, so and I like Mitsuda Grill because they're another legacy business who provides not only Japanese food, sushi, Japanese American food, Okinawan food, and chorizo, and you know, I mean, they do it all, and they have Wi-Fi. So when I go to eat by myself, I like to have Wi-Fi.
No, it's funny. I grew up mainly staying in the Japanese village. So whenever I'd eat, it would be around there. So when I finally ventured to Mitsuru, I was mind blown by it. Not only how good it is, but how like kind of hidden it is from like the village areas, but it's I think it's becoming one of my favorite spots. Um,
You walk into it, you're walking back into 1950 or something.
it certainly feels and smells that way, but it's delicious.
Right?
So,
Yeah.
um, have you picked up any new hobbies since retiring?
Well, I've done it before, but I'm paying more attention to vegetable gardening.
Hmm.
And so like it's almost a daily thing to water it and check it and all that. Um, Other than that, not a new hobby, but I've been walking,
Hmm.
and so my wife and I like to walk in places that, LA is not a walkable city,
Mm-mm.
but so we find places to walk. Sometimes we have to drive to walk at some place, but we do both, you know, uh, walking and hiking in hillsides, place trails, and also urban walking.
Hmm.
Downtown walking, we've been doing that at LTSC for a while. And then now, like, we're putting a group together to go to the bridge.
Mm. Very cool.
And by the time that we do it, I hope that all these things settle down a little bit, quiet down. But
Yeah, definitely, definitely. If you could invite 5 people to dinner, dead or alive, who would they be?
okay, I think the first one would be Malcolm X.
Hmm.
The second might be Mandela.
Hmm.
And I think it'd be fun to meet ALC,
Definitely.
Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez. Uh, these are all political people. I was trying to think of somebody else. Um, yeah, I'm not. Uh, I'm trying to think of some sports figures, but none really come to mind. Yeah, no, I can't think of any right now.
Hey, it's okay. If you want to do
Yeah,
that, it's a smaller dinner, but it will be
yeah,
an interesting one for sure.
it would.
And then to close it out, one last one. What would the title of your autobiography be?
That might be it. Um, oh man, that's too deep for me.
Mm.
I have to think about it. I don't want to say something that sounds stupid
Well,
or,
the
or
good
something
thing.
that
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, something that doesn't really reflect what
Mm.
but
I think phew it makes sense for your body of work for the time being. And the good thing is, this podcast is not going to hold you to your word. So this doesn't have to be the
good,
final title.
good, good.
But I do hope that autobiography does come out because I think, for one, it would mean a lot to a lot of people, and secondly, because of how like what a turn pager the Mike Murase story is, and so I hope that's in the future works for you, but not gonna pressure you into it. Um,
I've been asked to write a memoir by many people, but I'm considering writing little snippets of
hmm,
little vignettes but it wouldn't be quite an autobiography.
hmm. Well, I hope we all know when it comes out. I will be first in line. Maybe not. You have a lot of big fans and admirers, so maybe I'll be somewhere.
Thank
I'll
you.
be somewhere in line. But Mike,
Thank you.
thank you so much for taking the time. I encourage people to read up more about you because there's so much more that we can't cover within this podcast. It would take too long. There's so much to talk about with you. But yeah, thank you so much, Mike. It's been a
Well,
pleasure.
okay. Yeah, thank you for asking. And I would close with this that uh, Margaret Shimada, if you are listening, you should do this podcast.
Thank you again to Mike for jumping on the podcast and discussing his mental health story and how it collided with his time at LTSC, his other work as an activist, his other jobs, his other work. Um, again, I think he's just so inspiring, and it's so great to hear from him. And I'm still looking forward to hearing if there is a better basketball equivalent to his game other than Draymond Green. So if you enjoyed this episode, you can subscribe to our show for our episodes that release on every other Tuesday, and give us a rating or review on your favorite podcast platform. If you would like to support our podcast and help us grow, you can do so with a donation to the link at the bottom of the episode description. To hear more about Changing Tides, follow us on Instagram at LTSC_Changing Tides, or check our website, thechangingtides.org. Let's continue to change the tides on mental health.